Hey everybody, it's Luke here. We are just looking at a high distinction example and a pass example for our final research report. So I'm sorry this is getting to you so late. When you're a freelancer, you take what you can get time and space wise, so hence you may be hearing some cafe music in the background and the odd clink or coffee making sound or baby boomer mums catching up, because that is the life of a freelancer. So where are we? So please bear with me. We are on researching social media publics. We're in the unit outline here. Here's S's very nice picture. Look at this great sense of digital community right here. Okay, and we are getting to our third research project plan here. Okay, so it's worth 50%, remember. It's due at the end of week 12, that's this Sunday. So hence, rather than waiting for perfect environment, I just need to record this with the slightly embarrassing background noise and get this to you as soon as possible. Okay, 2,500 words to answer a couple of questions that have come in by email. I'll get to the rest of you as soon as possible if I haven't already answered your question. Now, we've got here, this is our HD example. Okay, so we've got a project title. So we've basically got a layout that's just like the planning document that we've released for your, for you to base your own project on. And if you can expand out those subheadings into full sentences and use some of the week 7 lecture material of those 4 sentence types in paragraphs, then hopefully you've got enough confidence and reworking and development to turn out really good 2,500 word project plans. Okay, remembering that some of these, some people are writing like 10,000 word, 20,000 word proposals. Okay, so it's just a matter of scope. So can you do a 2,500 word plan? Yes, you can. This title: Online Fan Communities, Sports Marketing and Non-Traditional Markets. And then a little bit of a colon or semicolon, ice hockey in the Asia Pacific. So that's very specific. We've got a project description that's very, that just sort of paints the field and then defines the intervention in the field, as we've done for our pictures. So we've talked about, so this student's talked about where ice hockey's been, where it actually takes place physically, and then therefore that's the problem and the solution of the online fan communities, and then placing it in context with research here. Okay, so we've got our tutor Jessamy, who is, I'm like new Jessamy, if you like, and we've got some nice feedback here. So you can see it's gradually getting more specific. What are the limits of the background literature? And where is the opening that this project plan might find some relevance? This is a very important thing to do. It's been noted by the tutor, Jessamy. So we've got a lot of placing this study and these ideas in the context of the prior research. This shows that you've done the work. If you can reproduce this, shows you've done the work. It shows that you've got a great context for your ideas. It's often in any humanities-based subject, but even in hard sciences, at this point where you're pitching stuff and describing backgrounds, it's often your ability to contextualize and connect your work with existing work that shows, that helps people have a confidence in your ability and shows that you know what you're talking about. So we've got some detail here, smaller grassroots sporting leagues and different kinds of communities and sports. So there's a few different ideas going around here in the opening. And this is like setting up a kind of a, like a vocabulary of concepts and terms to keep talking about throughout. And specific examples here. And tutor suggested a bit of more natural rewording. You might want to read your work out to a partner or study buddy, or read it out to yourself, record it and listen back, because that is often the best way to figure out that, I've tortured many a written sentence that as soon as I hear with my actual ear, I immediately know needs to be changed or simplified. So the case study focus. So here's very much the what, where, when and who. So not a particular case study. So some people have asked, because Anthony's example has a case study, does everyone need a case study even if that's not part of your work? And the answer is no, you don't need that. However, case studies are a great opportunity to contextualize your work and show kind of like the field version of your work. So I do recommend it, especially if your project feels a bit floaty and doesn't feel refined enough. If your project does feel refined and you just feel like you need to come up with a case study for the sake of it, then that's not... please don't take that on board, okay? If you've got a strong idea and you can back up the hows and whys, then please do so. So one thing this case study does, even though this person's received an HD, I would say they've done all the what, where, when and who, but they haven't necessarily addressed the how and why. So it will most likely look at specifically at the Winter Olympics and or the IIHF tournaments. Great. But I would love to see in a second sentence or a second half of this sentence, a how and why. The reason we're choosing this is because of the following reason. These teams often do not have widespread support. So this is a reason for excluding these smaller leagues. Okay, so that does sort of tangentially address a how and a why, about why to focus on the bigger events at the start. It's a bit implied, so if you want to explicitly spell it out to me, I'll be marking, then you go ahead and do that, because as I've said a few times throughout the semester, that your research project design is extremely creative, and it's definitely an art, but it's not poetry. Okay, so you want to make a link, you make it as explicit as possible, whereas a poetic link would be this, implied association. So we've got some justifications happening here, and then we're moving into broad questions for the research. Okay, so this is sort of a natural segue from the aims overall of the project to the broad questions. This is where, when some of you have wanted to refine down and capture the whole lessons in one question, that is certainly one way to go and a viable way. It's what a lot of great researchers do. But I've also said if you've wanted to connect up a few interrelated questions around a topic, as per the original question 3 online question, then that is totally appropriate as well. And sometimes that lets you flesh out the full scope of what you're doing in a way that trying to capture it all in one question, you can end up with quite a tortured long question with several semicolons. So I'm always a fan of breaking that up into multiple sentences if that's what you need to do. Then again, if you haven't do that too much, it might be a sign that your project is too wide. So you can see some topics addressed, and then key questions that kind of some subsidiary elements that link to it. Okay, don't feel like you need to copy this structure with like the bullet points. Here, I'd be happy for that to flow on with just long sentences. You might want bullet points summing up a topic, but you'd want that. So we've got sort of an explanation of those questions. So that's quite good, but you don't need to copy that exactly, and I don't want to see people just automatically copying that. But certainly breaking down the question, you could put it in quotation marks, you could bullet point it, you could just use long text. This layout is a bit awkward to me personally, but certainly works. I certainly understand it and get the point. So you can see again further refinement of the language that's being used. And now down to the brass tacks. This is the proposition of this project. Okay, so this is like the business deal of this research project. Even with the sociological hat on, we've got, if you read this, I will give you this. It's a bit of quid pro quo. This is what you can get out of it. So have a look here at this. You can pause this anytime and focus in on the precise text. And here's like a subsidiary aim of the project. Okay, so into the specific research question. So just ever refining. We're up to comments 6, 7, and 8. We've just got some nice, gentle feedback. You will get less of this feedback from me. You will get more of an overall summary at the end rather than in-text feedback. That's just a bit of a tutor preference. And then, of course, those of you who have got in touch with me personally know that I like to give extended sort of feedback to people who go out of their way to really work on this stuff. So just make sure you're proofreading, reading your stuff out. So we've got here a discussion around the research question that refers to the relevant research that's come before, and it's talking a bit about methods here ahead of time, because methods is the next section. But it's sort of the argument around why limit and restrict and focus the research question into this area. I think they've strayed into methods a little bit, and a lot of this stuff is your judgment. It's about how you justify what you're doing, but not in a sort of a defensive way, but in a, you know, apparent and explicable way. So here's a hashtag analysis. So here's the X is Y because Z structure at work. Okay, so here's the chosen platform. The chosen platform, X, is Twitter. Why? Because Z. These three main reasons. There's 3 Zs here. Fantastic stuff. So it's not just doing something, it's explaining why you're doing it and showing that you know why these decisions are being made in your project. That shows full mastery of the topic area, also shows great mastery of your own ability to kind of rationally explain something thoroughly. Deep hanging out, probably my favourite term when it comes to social media, ethnography, sociology, anthropology. Deep hanging out sort of shows that this topic area was kind of invented by hippies at the turn of the century, and I kind of love that. I just think it's cute. So again, we're talking to rationale, so not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it. And I think for a lot of you with your pitches, that's where you're up to. You've made some decisions about what you want to talk about, but you need to develop the why you're doing that, why you've made those decisions. And oftentimes that means linking your work back to the research that you've undertaken to show how the research you did wasn't just a fun exercise or a not so fun exercise, but it was purposeful and it's led to you making these developed decisions in your work here. Now, likewise with the ethical issues, there's a little bit of a did it because I was told to do it element to the ethics in the research questions and in the pitches. So remember, the main thing about ethics is not just what am I doing and what are the ethical issues that are relevant. And of course, it's privacy. Of course, it's the sensitivity around people being minors and so on. But you've got to show what changes will your project make that are a concerted, thoughtful and responsible response to those ethical issues. So if your project had to change in quite a major issue because of an ethical concern, that wouldn't be a restriction of your project. That would show that your project's operating at a higher, more sophisticated level than otherwise. Okay, so don't back away from that and pretend it's not there. Lean into it, explain it. Have a read of this just to see how much detail you can go into here. Okay, so we're talking about combating and addressing common concerns. So this is like, hey, I know it's not special to point out anonymity and privacy. Here's how it works, particularly in this project. Here's an answer. So this answer here is relevant to the methods used. Okay, the deep hanging out and the hashtag, not so much the hashtag analysis, but certainly using pseudonyms, letting people use pseudonyms so they're not having to sort of put their primary profile at risk by participating in the research. So you can have a look at the level of detail here. This final bit about age could be better addressed. As we found, like the university ethics departments often won't approve interactions with young people, even if they've got like guardian support and stuff, and written permission. But you certainly want to capture that at the very least. You want to sort of be as responsible as possible and proactive as possible in this field. So we've got talk about transparency and intentions, disclaimers, and availability to the community. So a good acknowledgement that this research is taking place as part of a community that pre-exists the research. And then a reference to unintentional bias, which is kind of the downside of deep hanging out, which we've talked about as the Margaret Mead paradox of being there changes the data. The researcher's presence changes the data. And then again addressing it. To resolve this, there you go. There could well be a conclusion here before just leaping to references. I would prefer that the ethics doesn't just stop, that there's a conclusion of the pitch itself. Okay, a conclusion that maybe goes back to the promise made at the start. Okay, and addresses that. What can we say about it to kind of wrap it up with that journey of the proposal in mind? So I would like to see a short conclusion there. It need only be even 50 to 100 words, but something specific that kind of rewards the reader for getting to the end. Now we can see this and say this together, now that we've sort of gone through this plan together. Okay, remember you can talk in the first person. I plan to do this, I plan to do that. You can say this project will seek to achieve this or that. It's up to you, but it is okay. It's not a deal breaker to use the first person. Now, I've had a couple of questions about references. The answer is never a set amount of references. The answer is the right amount of references to prove what you need to prove. So enough standing on the shoulders of what's been done before, enough contextualizing of the field, the research field that exists before you, and then how your project intervenes and why. And that again, as we saw it, refers back to research that we're standing on the shoulders of particularly important stuff that's out there. Some of these sources won't be particularly about sports or online communities and so on, as this project is about, but they'll be capturing something about the methods. It might be something about hashtag analysis applied to a completely different topic, but there's enough commonality in the method that the student thought, oh, I can use this. I'll stand on the shoulders of this prior research method and sort of apply it to my own, use some of the language and concepts, to put myself in the best possible position. Okay, because you can see there's quite a lot of consulted works here. Okay, so a few errors in proofreading and a reference list. Fantastic amount of research got rewarded, and saying, hey, this is really the standard of an honours thesis. So if you're interested in that, have a chat about it. So of course, anyone who, if this does tickle your fancy, and you think, oh, I might be good at this, I might be okay, and you've gotten some feedback along those lines, then do come and talk to Esther or I about what you might do next in this area. Okay, and I put those comments up alongside so we could keep track. So let's just make sure I've done my due diligence here. Comment 10. Remember, you need to identify that the method is a quantitative in nature and the general benefits of quantitative analysis. Okay, so a bit of fleshing out there. And then I think Jessamy has just picked up the student on putting in the year, and also a bit about the referencing style, that putting your year in brackets here might not be the way to go. I wouldn't really mind that, as long as if it follows the guide, it's fine. There's a few variations that are okay. The main thing is that you do the same thing throughout. I certainly would have, where's an example? Here's an example where, oh no, that's the title. Yeah, no, I wouldn't. I mean, I wouldn't take any points off for someone putting a year in brackets. If it's the same throughout. If it were different and some were and some weren't, that's where you'd lose marks. But yeah, follow the study guide as strongly as you possibly can, and closely as you can. But I wouldn't be penalising people for doing that. Remember to include entire set of names for reference list. Comment 12 here. So at the et al. So you would list all the authors here in the references, and then in text, if you mentioned them, you would use the first name et al. But in the reference list itself, you would list all the authors. So I think maybe what this student's done is, by having the year in brackets like this, they've mixed up. They've done a bit of the sort of footnotes, Chicago-style footnoting, reference style, because that's what I'd put in a footnote of main text, and confusing that with the reference list at the end. So yeah, a totally minor error. I wouldn't deduct mark for it, especially if it's consistent. Okay, we're on to our next one. So that's our HD, and this is our pass. So let's have a look at what's different. I hope I've de-identified this appropriately. So, project title. Again, a significant role social media plays when it comes to finding the next travel destination. So, you can see already with the title, that's a sentence. That's not necessarily a title in the same way as the first one was. Likewise here, I'm going to go straight to the comments. So you can just already see from the title that there's a bit less clarity, can't you? Okay, so we've got a project description being blank. Is this the same title? Why is this title in italics and this one's in bold? Is this a subtitle of this? I don't know, I've got no idea. It is just not as well or thoughtfully laid out. We've got our sort of entry point here, which will be different from your hook of your pitch, but might take from a similar theme, but because it's written material rather than a live presentation capturing people's interest in the moment, it will be more formal. Now there's a bit of evidence of research here and context. There's an attempt to do it, but it's far more general. And it's using this research. It's great if you can pitch your project on its own terms, and before you get into the nitty-gritty of particular references here and there. So this is a very specific. If this was like a major idea that the whole project was built off, I would think that's maybe okay to have in the intro. But in general, we try to keep references out of our introductions, and we try to just state in our own words what we're trying to do and why. And then we would introduce a stat like this later on as part of like the rationale. So I would question putting that there. So Jessamy said, please say what you mean by millennials. So remember, with our writing table of appropriate writing, we have some sort of competing aims. If we're talking about common sense stuff, we tend to want to explain things out and stick to that formal column of the writing style matrix that Esther and I have posted earlier in the year that you should definitely consult. So this is doing a similar thing in terms of spelling out the issue. I think they've done a good job here, actually. It's very background specific. It's not talking about the project in relation to this background. Jessamy, the tutor here, is questioning if it is social media. I'm just going to deal with this so that So Jessamy's questioning if TripAdvisor is actually, it's not the same as social media. It's an online platform. But how, in what way does it count as social media? You know, there's an argument to be had there, but is it straight up? So you need to explain. That's where you need to have that great awareness and show what you're doing. So this is like the research has been done, but isn't an appropriate kind of has it been appropriately kind of summarised and applied to the student's own argument? That's really what's at odds here. Sorry, what's at stake here. Now, I do like the structure of this paragraph. Here's the evidence. This is crucial as researcher. So this is the y. So that's the x is y. Sorry, this is the x is y, and this is the z component. For this reason, okay. Here's the reason. Here's the rationale behind using this. Okay, so Jessamy is the tutor. This has been stated as a fact, but it doesn't have any evidence to reinforce it. So that is an assumption. So that's where, if we go back to the week 7 lecture, the conclusion is out of step with the evidence and the premises. So certain premises are laid out, certain evidence is given to support that, and then the conclusion's made, but Jessamy's saying, hang on, these things do not match. So Jessamy's seeing some pretty stressed out seams here. Jessamy says, good to see discussion of other sites, but why are you going off Facebook to another platform? So there's a consistency problem and a scope problem here, and a kind of a wandering off from the stated focus. But I would say that stated focus haven't even been really summarised clearly enough from the start, which is sort of part of this student's problem and why they got a pass overall. P's get degrees, sure, they say it, it's real, mathematically it checks out. However, the more time you can and thought you can put into this, and as we've said throughout the semester, the more you'll be able to use these skills to really separate yourself in whatever work you do through your sort of analysis and applying your analytical skills to problems and problem solving in detail, and making these assessments and this kind of critical engagement, even if you don't want to be a social media researcher. So it's great that the student is using quotes and then paraphrasing and building off that in their own words. However, it's a bit off. It's a bit broad and a bit general. So it's the structure-wise, I'd be giving points for structure, and I love structure, but the content isn't quite there to match how good the structure is. But I would actually be noting and saying, hey, this is great structure. But you need to make sure your comments closely follow. Your conclusions are coming naturally from your premises and your evidence that you're offering. And there's a bit of a non sequitur too. So we're still explaining the problem here. That looks like a major industry-wide issue, and it's coming at the end of the introduction. So I don't know about that. That looks like an early paragraph introduction for me. So the last question, the second last comment, I'm concerned you've over-relied on this particular source. It's not academic or peer-reviewed, and therefore should only be used to reinforce your arguments alongside other peer-reviewed pieces. So that's a really great comment. And then the last one for this background, there needs to be more done here to establish an existing gap in the current research. So where's the intervention? What's the situation? The research hasn't been of a high formal academic standard, and therefore the ground isn't very strong to then say, here's how I'm going to intervene, or here's how my project's going to intervene in the current research. So this is like a fundamental problem, because that's a real cornerstone of what we've been trying to do. And Jessamy still has problems with the millennials definition here too. Particular location, so we're talking about limiting. Limitations make your project viable. Again, good structure, just the quality of the content's not really there. When that's the case, when things are a bit under-researched and under-prepared and underdeveloped, even if you get good structure, you end up with a bit of filler. Okay, and you can see that here in the language. It's just not the same as in the previous student's pitch. This is trying to be a really applied example, but again, it's just not a solid enough foundation in well supported. So what's Jessamy's comment? It would have been really good for you to use some of these examples in the introduction as a way to lead to the wider project. So I totally agree. Throughout this research, participants will dive deeper into the power that such platforms play. Okay, I say that is technically grammatical, but frankly doesn't make sense. I'd call that an expressive error. Jessamy says participants don't really need to do this. It's the role of the researcher to uncover these things, and I would agree. But I would also question the basic English, the basic grasp on the English language there, and why millennials prefer to turn to them rather than speaking to travel agencies. Again, because there's a different definition problem of what a millennial is and why investigate them and do all that great background cornerstone stuff. This point sort of floats in space and it doesn't really have a strong sense of purpose. So the broad questions, Jessamy's just made a general note here, framing of questions. So all the stuff that I've just mentioned goes to the framing of questions. And this student is falling into a bit of repetition. FOMO raises. FOMO, you could design some great projects around the concept of FOMO, but you would want to link it to research that's come before, even if it didn't use that term, just the same kind of operation in mind of user behavior on different platforms. That idea that we're always instantly connected and instantaneous and constantly multi-platform connected. You could talk about FOMO in a research context, but you'd have to get it right and not just sort of load up some casual, informal, common sense articulations here as this student's done. But the thing is, this student is clearly thinking about the topic, but they've not gotten out of their common everyday reactions and responses to capture the research, get across it, show that they're in command of it, and then building their ideas from there. So that's really this student's limitation. And as you can see from that, if you're getting similar feedback for your work, it doesn't mean that your tutor thinks that you're completely slacking off or just aren't up to the task. It's a very particular problem of trying to get into that space of building your comfort and skill using and interacting with formal academic work. And you need to do that. Like I've done academic work, but I've spent more time not being an academic than being an academic for sure. And now you've got like suburban baby, kind of tacit noise in the background. So please excuse me. And trust me that non-academic organisations achieving, who have serious business to get on with, are using academic work all the time to justify their program and show why they're trying to, show what they're trying to achieve and why they're trying to achieve it. So don't just write this off because you personally don't want to be an academic. So they've got the structure here, the proposition. That's a good start. Now FOMO's come into it. Why didn't we see this early on? That's my question. As we're a generation surrounded, so this is assuming that everyone reading it is a millennial, instant face, hand in the face for people who don't fit that, and a few assumptions there. Is this true that millennial travellers are highly encouraged to post their images online? I'm not sure if that's the case. Is it because they're millennials? Yeah, I don't know. So again, we've got some premises and conclusions and some evidence here. They're all floating and don't sort of tightly lock together here. Let's see where Jessamy's at with this. Comment 13. Framing of questions. Oh, we looked at that before. Great, but I'd really like to see some academic sources. Yes, we've discussed. Research question. This research question needs to be mentioned way earlier. All the background that the student's done needs to be built around the research question. Okay, so they've kind of buried the lead, as they say, because we're coming to this research question way too late in this written proposal. Jessamy's feedback here is it needs to be more specific. As I've discussed across the semester, we've asked students to identify demographics, social media platforms they'll be examining. It's not really enough to say social media alone as a very broad category. Similarly, millennials. So she's really stating that this problem of founding concepts is a huge problem and limitation in this plan. And as a bit of a tutor whisperer over the years, I can tell that the tutor is a little frustrated at this point to be getting work at this standard after so many attempts in the assessment to actually develop the material past this point. So I can maybe I'm wrong, but I reckon I'm picking up a bit of a tone of frustration from Jessamy where she's like, why am I still reading material like this after so long? So diving deeper isn't an academic term. I don't really know what that means if you're asking people to dive deeper, unless literally your research proposal is about swimming. This isn't. I would send this student the writing style matrix about formal and informal stuff, and I would also have a massive uncomfortable crack at them about appropriate research, especially in third year where you guys are expected to at least understand the difference. Approximately 80 to 100 people are participating in the online survey. Cool. Why? Why is that? X is Y because Z, where is it? It's not there. Comment 16. Well, comment 15 is just me feeling like she maybe came down a bit hard in the earlier comment and trying to make it up and get a bit of balance in there. Again, my total subjective opinion. I've been wrong before and I will again. So this is just me correcting something about what makes a good survey. At least 1,000 responses in order to ensure that their results are generalizable. Additionally, you need to say how you recruit these people. So I've made a big deal of the second part of that feedback in terms of the quid pro quo. What's going to motivate people to be part of your project? And Kath Aubrey's week 6 lecture really did the best job of stating exactly how she turned the problems of recruitment and motivation and quid pro quo into a really live functioning workshop series that really addressed what her participants were getting out of it and what she was in turn getting out of it for her research, which that really captured my imagination that week. I honestly haven't done much quantitative research in my personal academic work, so I don't have a sense of what's a fair number, but Jessamy at 1,000, she's got her expertise in this area, and maybe that's something we can ask Esther to specify as well, with her very strong research background. In fact, she's the head of media research at Swinburne. What do we got here? So this is good. Well, no, okay, it's not good. It's an attempt to be good in that the student's using a source to talk about particular methods. However, it's not. You can see they've just borrowed it. They've just quoted it in a chunk. So they haven't really applied it to their own work, have they? Let's see what Jessamy says about it. And again, it's not a peer-reviewed piece. You would only need a few minutes to locate one in the Swinburne library. Okay, I'm calling it. She's frustrated. Why am I dealing with this kind of work after all the work we've done together? That is the implied question in comment 17, I believe. And look, there's lots of good reasons why students don't hand in their best work. Lots of things about life intervene. But, by now, Esther and I have a really good sense of a few students who have really tried their best to juggle different elements of their lives to get their studies done. And it's important that you try to get your tutors and lecturers and particularly your markers on board about where you're at, rather than just handing in stuff that looks like you haven't made the effort. The students tried to think about it, but I think they've tried to produce a developed plan from a standing start, rather than working and developing their skills and materials and resources throughout the semester. That's what it looks like to me. Here's a follow-up question from Jessamy. Will the interviews be structured, semi-structured, unstructured? How will you recruit participants? Again, quid pro quo. Here's the reliance on McLeod again, which Jessamy's already noted isn't an academic source, so it's a huge problem. This makes sense. It addresses the quid pro quo element. So a more appropriate number for focus groups rather than survey participants. So Jessamy's saying that this consideration of ethical issues doesn't really apply specifically to the methods in question. Okay, so they're too vague in general. I would say about 2/3 of you at this stage with ethical issues. So that's not a criticism. It's just saying that 2/3 of you need to think further about melding your ethical. Like I've spent a lot of time talking about connecting your research methods, multiple, to each other and connecting them strongly to the research question. And now in this final phase between the pitch and the written proposal, linking up your methods to your ethical issues is a really important thing to do. Definitely connect your methods to your research question and make sure that's firing and integrated and really strong first, and then make sure your ethical issues respond really strongly to your methods as well. Interesting comment from Jessamy there. Now with references, we're going to have heaps of problems. Online research, no. Huge problems here. Now suggested here, last year they were suggesting aiming for 15 or so references. Again, I am not a fan of putting numbers on this stuff. I think you use enough to show what you need to show, and there's such a variety in your project plans that I would hate to just put like a top-down number. And you know, what would I prefer to see 8 fantastic references to 15 terrible ones? You bet. As our former Prime Minister said, you bet I am, you bet we are. In a way that didn't make sense. I'm pretty sure Tony didn't get good marks when he was at uni. He essentially got a scholarship to Oxford because he could punch people in the face. But I actually have a picture of Tony blocking a punch with his face, so maybe that was one of his greatest skills of all as an academic. Okay, and we've got Jessamy picking up sort of a break in the kind of standards to play this stuff out. You can see some of these from these sources that they're just not. This looks like something that's like turns up on the first page of a Google search. Okay, so Swinburne, as I've said before, has the best librarians in the world. They'll work with you to make sure you're doing really good searches. Okay, so you should definitely use that. It's the 7th uni I've worked at, and I can tell you not all librarians are as on it as the Swinburne ones are, so please make the most of them if you feel like you've still got important research to do. Okay, so I think we'll leave it there. What are our general comments from Jessamy? So interesting topic, great to see, and the many concerns. So discussion about that intervention, short reference list, and that really showed in the content as we've discussed, or as I've talked at you in this one-way media form. Key piece of information. Yeah, so really the key, the driving force and the explanatory force, the explanatory power of the research methods wasn't there. And a bit too loose as well on the word count. So if it's 2,500 words, you can typically go 10% over or under with no problem. So 2,500 words, that means you can do 2,250 or 2,750 without penalty. If you go way over that, you're showing that you are not in control of the scope of your project or the scope of your language to describe that project. If you go under, you're showing that, again, you're not in control of the scope, but also that you haven't come up with enough to discuss. Okay, so I think coming in under is the worst of all. Like you're better off going over than under. But the best thing there, you've got a 500 word. You've got a 500 word buffer there between 2,250 and 2,750. So there's no reason not to get that right. And that's just another way of showing that you're in control of this material. Okay. That's the end of this presentation. All right, I've kept it short. I've tried to explain the background noise. I did make a comment about Tony. I can't help it. He sees my imagination from the start. People who walk around their bathers generally do. That's just life. I hope you all have a great final week. Get in touch with me. I'm happy to help you out by email. And what else? I'm recording this live. I'm not editing it. So this isn't the best finish. But yeah, it's been great to see people's progress that they've made throughout. So many people started off with a really general idea and have really tightened the screws and sharpened it up and pulled their finger out, and a whole bunch of other fantastic cliches between like the original week 3 question being submitted and their project pitch. Okay, and I really can't wait to see the hard work being done to put the finishing touches on things. Some of you really even have gotten your research topic together, your research question together just for your pitch, like a few days before your pitch. And that is great to see. Like I'm really impressed by you guys as a group. So yeah, pardon me. I'm not gonna edit this, so it's a little rambly. So please bear with me. And I just decided that rather than wait for the perfect conditions, I wanted you to have this as soon as possible. Okay. So all the best with it, and can't wait to read your work. Bye bye.